the materialist reductionism of the atheist scientist. It's not right. Factually, they were wrong. Their theory of perception was wrong.
Is this just a book that a bunch of men wrote thousands of years ago when they were sat around a campfire or whatever? And if it is, then it's just one person's opinion.
I lecture about it, I podcast about it, I write about it. It's like, that's what I believe. There it is.
Jordan Peterson gets pressed by the Diary of the CEO podcast about why young men need religion. I think I have a lot to say about it, and it's very interesting. Let's get right into it.
Interesting. I grew up as religious until I was 18. I say religious because the term's difficult to define to me, but my mother's was believed in God. She was Christian. My father's Christian. And at about 18, I started reading a lot of Richard Dawkins' books and other people's books. And I got to this place where I think I was atheist by the definition of I didn't think there was necessarily a God. And now I find myself in this place of being agnostic. Now, when I think about the Bible as a compass or as a guide, the part of my brain that's like rooted in this, like, I need evidence for everything, goes, is this just a book that a bunch of men wrote thousands of years ago when they were sat around a campfire or whatever? And if it is, then it's just one person's opinion, as much as any self-help book on a shelf is one person's opinion.
Well, okay, let's take that claim apart. I mean, yes, it is stories that people came up with thousands of years ago, but no, definitely not one person's opinion. Definitely 100% not, because these stories have been transmitted over millennia and organized and edited and transformed by a very large number of people.
I don't know what he means here. It's like it was edited and transformed over millennial. Yeah, maybe a little bit, but it's pretty widespread consensus that it's the same meaning over all this time.
Massive collective effort. And it's a collective effort undertaken by arguably the most literate and intelligent people there are, and that'd be the Jews.
Why would I listen to the Bible more than I'd listen to something Socrates wrote or any philosopher?
There's a huge overlap between the Greek philosophical tradition and the Christian tradition. I mean, Western culture is the amalgamation of Greece, Jerusalem, and Rome. So, and the early Christians saw tremendous parallels between Christian theology and Greek philosophy.
Where do you think we come from? You know, you've got the like Darwinism, evolutionary theory of we've evolved, etc. Then there's the more religious view that, you know, if you really think about the First Testament and the Early Testament and the stories of the, you know, creation, people think, you know, maybe we were just popped out of nowhere. But where do we youth believe that we come from? Do you believe a God put us here? Or do you believe evolution is true? Do you believe both are true?
You have to read the book.
But I want to, yeah.
I love what Jordan Peterson said. You have to read the book because this guy said he was a Christian until he was like 18, but it sounds like he doesn't even know anything about the Bible. He's like one of the testaments, the New Testaments. And he thinks the New Testament's like the Old Testament or something. I'm so confused. Yeah, maybe you should read the book before you make claims or start to decide whether or not something is true or false.
But I'm not trying to be a smart aleck in that response. It's a complicated answer.
Yeah.
Right? It's a complicated answer. I think that we're guided by the spirit of meaning. Okay? I think that's also our deepest instinct.
That's somewhat Darwinism.
Well, I had a rule for this book is I didn't make any claims about the biblical stories that I couldn't justify scientifically. I don't think there's a conflict. I think that viewing the biblical stories as an amalgam of superstitious proto-scientific theories is absurd. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all. These are stories.
So do you
Stories and scientific hypotheses aren't the same thing. The Lord of the Rings is not a scientific hypothesis, but that doesn't mean it's not true.
Do you believe my great-great-great-great-granddad was an amoeba?
Well, you were a sperm at one point. It's not that implausible. We all come from single-celled organisms.
This is I'm asking these questions because I'm genuinely I'm genuinely wrestling with.
I then read the Bible instead of ask him, but I hate that Jordan Peterson literally used the Lord of the Rings as an example. Not even like he compared them. He's like, I think the Lord of the Rings is a story, but I also think it's true, metaphorically, essentially. And that's where it's a little messed up.
Bunch of big existential questions that I've actually only been wrestling with maybe for like, I'd say a year.
Yeah.
So it's very fresh for me. And it's funny,
Yeah.
my arc here is religious Christian up until maybe 18,
Yeah.
like staunch atheist for 2 years, to the point that it was like my identity.
Yeah.
And then like
Yeah.
let go of that, drifted for a couple of years, and find myself at this really interesting point where I'm like back at the door of like, okay, let's look at some of these answers again.
Yeah. Well,
you
that's
fit your life
exactly
in.
why I wrote this book, because I know that that's the time, and it's not just the time for you. That's the time that we're in.
Yeah, it's the time we're in, 100%.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Well, it's partly because the Enlightenment has exhausted itself. Partly because it was wrong.
It's failed us, the individualism.
Well, I think exhausted is a better word, because it wasn't like the Enlightenment was without its benefits. We
When you
made
say the
immense
Enlightenment-
technological progress. The materialist reductionism of the atheist scientist.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
not right.
Yeah.
Factually, they were wrong. Their theory of perception was wrong. They're wrong. We see the world through a story. We do not see the world as a collection of facts. They're wrong. You see, the postmodernists figured this out, and that's why the postmodernists had a walloping influence on culture. Now, I'm no fan of the postmodernists for a variety of reasons, but their insistence that we see the world through a story, they're right.
I love how he's like, atheists are wrong. They're factually, intellectually wrong. And I love this point because it seemed like we were on this swing where we were up all the way, everyone thinking we need to be an atheist, but now it's coming back around saying that, wait a minute, maybe Christianity isn't so crazy. Maybe all these atheists haven't got it wrong. It's not that smart to be an atheist anymore.
That's right.
I agree. I mean, if you obviously read the book *Sapiens* by Yuval Harari, and his central point is that what bound us as humans and stopped us being these scattered chimps was stories. They bind us together. So I completely understand that we need a story. It's how everything, money, governments, etc., function. But what that story is, now I can agree
It's
that
a story of voluntary sacrifice.
100% agree that humans need that. There's no chance that we'd be here otherwise. And it's a set of values and principles. Now, those values and principles are often found in religion, but do they, and a belief in a God, but do they have to be? Could they be found in, could I theoretically make a new religion where me and my friends all unite against a set of values, sacrifice, giving,
That's a great question.
parenthood?
Well, this is what Nietzsche basically presupposed in some ways. So when Nietzsche observed that God had died, say in 1850 or thereabouts, his medication for that, his warning was, we'll descend into nihilism and communist totalitarianism. And that was exactly right. Maybe a mindless hedonism in there too. Dostoevsky concentrated more on that. Nietzsche said we'll have to create our own values. We'll have to become, that's what the Superman is, the Nietzschean Superman, the man who creates his own values.
Mhm.
Try. See what happens. You can't do it. You can't create your own values because values are real. They're not arbitrary. They're not relativistic. So imagine this. Imagine there's a very large number of games that could be played, like an infinitely large number. But there's a very small number of games that people want to play. And then there's even a smaller number of games that sustain themselves and improve as you play them. Okay, so that's like a landscape. You could think about it as a landscape of potential patterns of interaction. You could even think about it as a landscape of potential tribal affiliations, right? The rules of those games would be the principles of the society. Okay, now your question is, could we come up with our own set of rules? And the answer to that is no.
Why?
Because the sustainable, abundant playability of a game is not arbitrary. So, for example, if you want to get along with your wife, she has to want to play the game you're playing. Okay, now, there's lots of games you could play that aren't going to fit that criteria.
Yeah.
Now, then imagine it's even worse, though, because to get along with your wife, she has to want to play the game you want to play. But both of you have to play a game that works today and tomorrow and next week, next month, next year, right? And then you have to play it with your kids and your parents and a bunch of other people.
So can I ask then, so is
Yeah.
it the case that humans are designed in such a way where there's a certain set of values and stories that are most conducive with their reproductive survival.
Yes.
And so if that's true, and I completely agree, understand why that would be true, because this true for all species. Like there's a set of stories and narratives, probably in my dog, if you go back to 100 years from
Yeah.
when his ancestors were in the wild, that he needed to subscribe to
be a
reproduce,
dog.
to be a dog and to survive as a dog.
Yeah.
But so the question then becomes, where do those values come from? Are they innate within us because of our environmental factors? So I need to be this way because of the environment I live in, so that I can have sex with somebody and reproduce because of I have 2 arms, 2 legs, etc. I'm this advanced chimp. Or do they come from above somewhere and they're granted down to me? Because if I look at every animal,
Not or, and.
oh, and okay,
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's you're looking at the same problem from 2 different perspectives.
I'm going to be charitable and think here that Jordan Peterson's mindset is saying our innate values hopefully are coming from God, and that's just the way we're designed. We are designed to be looking to something outward. We're designed to have innate values within us. And we can't try to come up with moral values on our own because it's just going to be faulty. It comes from something above. But also we're created, so we have that value system within us. That's what I'm hoping he's getting at.
It's and. Yes, they're handed down from on high. Yes, they're instincts.
so who are they handed down from?
God.
Well, the religious.
Do you struggle with this question?
Well, it's a complicated question.
Yes, he does.
But you struggle with the answer.
What happened?
I struggle with making the answer simple enough to offer.
Just answer. Say yes, 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 yes.
Rapidly.
Are you clear yourself on it?
Not as clear as I could be.
Yeah, we know.
What is it you wrestle with? I've shared
Well,
what I
clarity is part of it.
Do you-
I mean, we want to make things as clear as possible. Breadth of coverage, right? I mean, people ask me what I believe, and I say, well, I'm not hiding what I believe. I lecture about it, I podcast about it, I write about it. It's like, that's what I believe. There it is. Is there obfuscation in that?
Yes.
Well, partly things are complicated, so it's very difficult to give short answers to complex questions. You tend to if you give short answers to complex questions, the answers tend to be symbolic.
Yeah.
You have to say something like, where do they come from? It's like, well, they come from God. Now, is that a useful answer? Well, it's a short answer, so it's useful in that it's short. It begs the question, what do you mean by God? We could return to that. In the story of Abraham, these are definitions. Because if you're going to talk about what's properly put in the highest place, you have to know what you're talking about. Okay, in the story of Abraham, the voice of adventure is to be put in the highest place.
Mm-hmm.
And if you follow that, then you become the father of nations. That's reproductive success, right? So that means the idea is that there's an alignment between the instinct that calls you to adventure and the probability that you'll be attractive to women in the manner that ensures the survival of your descendants.
And is that an environmental
It's both.
issue?
It's both. It's
both.
both. It emerges as a consequence of the constraints of social interaction, let's say. Like there's constraints, for example, on what makes a man desirable to a woman.
I will respect. He is literally only saying and admitting to what he actually believes. And since he's a very smart individual, usually the smarter you are, the more you realize how much you don't know. And that's a lot of my problem anyway. And he's realizing how much he doesn't know, therefore he doesn't want to say whether or not if he believes in something, or he's just deflecting, or it's both.
It has nothing to do with you, those constraints. Those are there, right? They're there in the society of women. They're eternal. They're not, no woman, she might vary in her opinion to some degree, but she partakes of the pattern. So it's there. Now, it's also built into you because you're a social creature, and so your physiology indicates to you the nature of that pattern.
So does my dog have a different religion to me? Does he have a different God?
To some degree. There's an overlap because you can communicate. Your dog understands you, and vice versa. So that's a good question. Social mammals understand each other. Right, so there's an overlap in their deepest instincts or their highest impulses. You can think about that both ways.
I was going through my head and thinking about like the Venus flytrap and my French bulldog Pablo, and they all need a different set of behaviors and principles and values to survive and thrive and be happy.
Well, you could think about that as sure.
So I was thinking then, does that mean that they all have a different
They have a nature.
God?
Yeah, they have a different intrinsic nature. That's another way of thinking about
They
it.
have intrinsic
because of the
nature, but not a
environment and
different
factors
God.
that they face as that species. So then Pablo's God might be slightly different to my God if we're talking about, because I'm trying to understand if like this idea of God is a set of evolutionary motivations.
Yes, that it is, and it is that.
Or
You
if
can think
it's-
about it as rising up from the material world or descending from on heaven. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter fundamentally. It's the same. It doesn't matter. Those are different ways of looking at the same problem.
When I say evolutionary motivations, it doesn't feel so divine. It doesn't feel like a reason to gather in a church. It feels like I'm just kind of a robot that's being steered by these motivations of don't do that, do this. This feels good. If you're with your friends and family, you feel good, so do that more. And if you're with your friends and family, you're safer, so you're more likely to have kids. Or is it this sort of divine thing that we society have told us God is, where we should worship and we should thank you so much and go to a church and get on our knees and pray? Because they're two very different things. One is like practical and pragmatic, and the other one is this divine thing.
Okay, here's one way of thinking about it. So,
Before he goes, guys, there are thousands of times that we do things that our nature doesn't want to do. We want to do what's easy. We want to do what feels the most comfortable, but sometimes we go outside of our normal thought process. We go outside of what's comfortable to do what we think is right. I wouldn't say that's necessarily evolutionist. I wouldn't say that's something just because that's what we're wired to do. We're not wired to, I don't know, completely give someone else, sacrifice ourselves for the good of other people. That doesn't seem very evolutionist.
I mentioned that in the story of Abraham, God is the call to adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's a definition. Now, the divine that's put forward in these library of stories has multiple characteristics. He's characterized in many ways, but there's an insistence that that reflects an underlying unity. Now, the unity is incomprehensible in its essence. Okay, so you have to accept that as the initial starting point. You're not going to get the answer.
Yeah.
Okay. You can see something complex from a variety of different perspectives. Okay. In the story of Noah, God is the impulse that comes to the wise to prepare when trouble's brewing.
Yeah.
Okay, now, so now you can think of that as an instinct. You can think about it as
Gut instinct, intuition.
Negative emotion,
Yeah.
anxiety, but it's more than that, because you can be afraid of something that isn't real.
Yeah.
Okay, now you might have to ask yourself, okay, what are the preconditions for your fear? What are the preconditions to the validity of your fear? So you're afraid, and you should be. Well, let's say that's a characteristic of someone who's wise. Okay, so then the question is, well, what's the essence of the wisdom that makes your fear valid? Noah is described in the story of Noah as a man wise in his generations. So that means that by the moral standards of his time, he's an upstanding human being. Okay, so now you can imagine that means he exists in harmonious relationship with his present self and his future self.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that makes him mature. But then he also does that in a way that serves his wife and his family and his community.
Mm-hmm.
So his self is balanced and optimized across those parameters. That makes him secure in his foundation and properly oriented. If you're secure in your foundation and properly oriented upward, then there's no difference between the voice of the divine and the instinct that preserves you in times of trouble.
Super interesting. Guys, what are your thoughts on this? Because this one, is very, very, I would say, in depth. And I have an idea what he's getting at here. I hope it's rooted in biblical ideology. Romans 2:15 says, they demonstrate that God's law is written on their hearts for their own conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them what they are doing right. So I love that. And if Jordan Peterson was trying to convey here, like it's an innate value written on our hearts. It's also like the law is within us, but also comes from above. That's what I hope he's getting at here. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Love and appreciate you all. If you haven't decided to follow Jesus, I encourage you to do that. It will be the best decision of your entire life. God is so good. He's worthy of praise. Will be the best decision of your entire life. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and comment down below your thoughts on this.